This is a lecture from Open Tuition.
This lecture looks at question 3 of the March 2020 Advanced Performance Management exam. You're strongly advised to look at this question, study it, think what you would have written if you'd been confronted with it in the exam. You're strongly advised to do all of that before you listen to this lecture. That way you'll be able to compare perhaps what you would have said, what you thought the question was about, with what I'm suggesting it is about. As always, we'll go to the requirements to kind of alert us, roughly speaking, what this question is concerning. And we see here, assess the changes which CORUSC will have to make in the areas of purchasing and production. So let's emphasize those two. Purchasing and production in order to supply goods on a just-in-time basis. So, guessing, but not being too stuck with this guess, it looks like a question that's maybe a company thinking of changing to just-in-time and what effects will be on its production and ordering procedures. And then prepare a cost-quality report based on information in Appendix 1 and comment on the potential quality cost changes in the light of the proposed move. So let's have a look at one here. Oh yes, we've got all these different quality related costs, and they want the report on the normal basis of conformance, non-conformance, internal, external, prevention, appraisal, and so on. We won't get into the detailed figures, I don't think, just yet. Appendix 1 was only referred to in Part B of the question. So just in time, keeping an eye on changes in production and changes in purchasing procedures. So CORUSC is a clothing manufacturing company in Teelan, produces a range of dresses which it sells to Eric. They're the only products which it makes, and Eric is his only customer. So, that's pretty important. If these are your only products, your only customers, you've got all your eggs in one basket. Eric is an organization you don't want to upset. If you were to think of Porter's 5 forces, this customer has got huge purchasing power. We mustn't do anything that's going to upset them. Eric is a well-known retailer. It's recently been affected by changes in purchasing preferences and to buying clothes online, and as a result is keen to reduce its inventory as a way to reducing its costs. Eric is also finding that its excess goods, which it has to discount, as consumer tastes appear to change more quickly than the past. So, Eric has presumably been a kind of traditional retailer buying large quantities of dresses, hoping that they will sell. Those that don't sell, it's going to be putting in the sales twice a year. CORUSC currently obtains its raw materials from 4 suppliers. Each of these suppliers operates differently in terms of processes and procedures, which they adopt. CORUSC has been happy with that, although it's obviously going to... Why are we being told that? Each of these suppliers operates differently in terms of processes and procedures, and it might be that though CORUSC is happy with it, that it's not very efficient. As the quality of the raw materials supplied has generally been acceptable. Generally. More recently, however, CORUSC has found reason to question the accuracy and quality of the raw material delivered from one supplier. In addition, another supplier now only dispatches material in full load quantities because it wishes to optimize the use of its delivery vehicles. So it seems to me it's got 4 suppliers, and 2 have become not so great. poor quality and insisting that Chorus buys a lot of raw material at a time. So I wonder if there's anything to be said here for going, maybe at some point, simplifying things for 2 to 1. Do we really need to have 4 suppliers with their different procedures and so on? I don't think I'd ever say go from 4 to 1, because that gives that one supplier a lot of supplier power. If that one supplier, if something happens there, production, if they were taken over by a competitor of ours, we could just find our own business greatly compromised. So even when you're doing just in time, if that's what we have to do, people have learnt to multi-source. And we've seen this recently in just-in-time companies, where from time to time travel, air transport, if you like, has become compromised, perhaps with something like the COVID epidemic, far fewer planes in the sky, and maybe more difficult to source from a particular country. So for safety, probably stick with a minimum of 2 suppliers if it comes to that. The current production methods, the current production metric is for production efficiency and the number of dresses produced per period. So it's very much a kind of volume business. And the method of production is to produce in long production runs, which is going to feed into this volume business. So long production runs will allow high volumes at relatively low cost. Staff working in the production department have their bonuses related to this as well. So they will be very much inspired by long runs, high production volumes, big bonuses. Goods which have not been produced to the required standard have traditionally been rejected at the end of the production process. So end here, it's not perhaps very up to date in terms of its quality control here, because quite often it's better to inspect goods partway through production and reject them then rather than to wait at the end. But we'll see. I'm just wondering, why have we been told that? We must have been told that they're rejected at the end, not as a kind of random piece of information, but the examiner will have thought about it. The company has only 5% of its goods returned from Erie due to poor quality. So that is external failure, really, isn't it? Only 5%. I would have thought 5% was quite high. I would certainly worry, although we are the only person who supplies Ericht, although Ericht is our only customer, there's nothing in the question which says we are the only person, that we are the only supplier. I think that's right. Yes, Ericht is our only customer, but presumably Ericht will have many, many suppliers. And I would worry a little bit potentially about that 5%. It seems to be quite a high rejection figure. Ericht wants to move to just-in-time. Presumably wants to do that because Ericht is itself facing these volatile purchasing patterns from its customers online and so on. He wants to move just-in-time purchasing from Chorus, the board of Chorus, because that's here to help, advising how the company would have to change its approach to areas of purchasing production to prepare itself for just-in-time principles. Well, really, if your only customer is moving to just-in-time, you will as well. This means that your customer will be producing many, many small orders for a great variety of goods, dribs and drabs. It may order, 50 dresses of a particular sort find they don't sell and never order them again. And there's no point in you having produced a long production run of 1,000 of these dresses if your only customer is never going to buy more than 50 of them. So just in time here has to almost spread through the whole process. It is driven by ERISC. We, CORISC, have to adopt it. And actually, if we're now producing just in time, we'll have to buy just in time. So our suppliers will have to move to a just-in-time system to service us as well. You can't just have one link in the chain being just in time with any sort of logic or safety. The Chief Executive Officer does not believe the company will encounter any problems in adapting to their requirements. It says we've got a very good quality control practice and procedures. Confident we can consistently supply goods which are required in acceptable quality and high price. Our practice of testing goods at the final stage of production before we support a factory leases, but remember it was 5%. We have a list of costs given to us which they reckon gives all the costs of quality, and we will be asked to be, I think in part 2 of the question, looking at that, and we're told that their current revenue is 4.5 million. What sort of IT system do they have? It says, because you can't have really just in time without good IT, the amount of coordination, almost not quite split-second coordination, but close, accurate coordination needed between sales and production and purchases, and then further on down to the people who are supplying you, is so immense. The volume of data being processed is so immense that you need to have good IT. I don't think it says anything about it. Doesn't say anything about their IT. Okay, so it says changes which they'll have to make in the areas of purchasing production. So let's say production first. They will have to have flexible production. This means that they will have to have a flexible access to the inventory needed to production. So in other words, flexible purchasing. It's too dangerous to have lots and lots of stock in case it's never purchased again. They will have to have flexible manufacturing, and this may mean new machinery, so you can quickly change the if you like, the setups of the machinery to produce different patterns of dress and so on. You will have to have flexible members of staff who are willing and able to change quickly from making 50 of that dress to making 60 of that dress, instead of what presumably they used to do was maybe set up a production run for a week and produce several thousand of a particular product. We'll have to make sure that they are rewarded in terms of flexibility, not in terms of volume. And because the volumes, I think, inevitably will not be as high. And I suspect the costs might be slightly higher because of the lack of long production runs. But it's just the automation that is implied in dealing with orders, dealing with purchasing, dealing with production, maybe changing machineries to machinery with greater automation is what's going to be needed as well, to allow this constantly changing variety of goods to be made quickly, reliably, and efficiently. IT is needed to process the orders coming in. You get an order for a particular dress coming in, that will be exploded, if you like, into how many square meters of material, how many buttons, how many zips, and so on. We may have to send the order for the material and the buttons and so on out to our suppliers that's issuing orders. We have to be tracking those orders coming in, making sure they get the production line properly. So a very sophisticated IT will be needed. So huge changes there. The other element which goes with just-in-time, doesn't raise it here, but you could just put it in, is sometimes for just-in-time, it's better if you are physically close to your suppliers and your customers. If you are a long way away, so it takes a day for the goods to be transferred, then you're losing a day for the just-in-time processing. And some of the very large companies dealing with just-in-time have their manufacturing plant and all dotted around it are their suppliers, so it only takes about 10 minutes to get a delivery made. The other element that just-in-time can bring in is that quality has to be almost faultless. If you're dealing with a conventional inventory system, then if you supply some goods to someone and those goods are faulty and have to be sent back, then your customer may well have a stock of goods in their warehouse or something which will get them through that problem. There's a kind of a safety margin, if you like, in the system. They are not closely linked. But if your customer sends orders when essentially they're out of goods, and then you send goods which are inferior quality, and that customer can't use them, then there's really a complete breakdown in the chain, and that customer of yours will be suffering from profit loss because there's no kind of buffer stock, if you like, that they can draw on to get them through your reworking time. So quality has to be really, really good. And I'll come back to this 5% and this business of inspecting goods only at the end, and the 5% being discovered by your single vital customer is probably not going to be tenable once you work to a just-in-time system. Anyway, you can look at our answer. The key thing here is to recognize for this company what the particular problems are. It has to keep watch over this single important customer. It will probably have to pass on this just-in-time down to its suppliers in turn, and that's going to be easier, I think, to get the close coordination going if you've only got two, in a way, good and cooperative suppliers, and you get rid of the two who couldn't give you good quality and who were a bit awkward about supplying you with small amounts of raw material. But it has to be tailored to the specifics of this question rather than a kind of general rundown of just-in-time systems. The second part of the question asked us to produce here a cost of quality report. We have to think, I suspect a cost of quality report is not necessarily standardized, but they've given you the quality report headings here: cost of conformance, prevention and appraisal, and then cost of non-conformance, internal and external failure costs. Now, some of these costs will be easy to allocate. So the first one, for example, estimated costs of handling complaints from Ericht. That one there is almost certainly, it must be, mustn't it? It must be external failure costs. Another one, for example, rework costs. Reworking, they don't inspect goods to the end. So this is going to be, I think, an internal failure cost. So I think the reworking cost is going to be part of internal failure. Here, product recalls and the cost of goods returned, again, I think is going to be the external failure costs here. routine maintenance, I would say, is probably going to be a prevention cost and the like. The examiner wasn't maybe too concerned about how some of these costs were actually allocated. Some are absolutely obvious. Others you could have maybe put in one category or another here. The examiner wasn't too worried about where some of these smaller costs perhaps went. It doesn't actually matter where this 2, for example, on quality audit went. But provided you were reasonable in the allocation of these costs to these different quality report headings, you would have seen that the vast majority of the costs, let me just check how much it was from my answer, I think it was about 80% or something. No, it was 65% of the quality costs were to do with external failure costs. Another 28 was to do with internal failure costs. And the total costs in general, and this here, that was 9% of revenue. So these external failure costs and then the internal failure costs came to a huge percentage of revenue. Really, really unconscionable cost. And it leads us back to this idea that they were a bit self-satisfied with this kind of 5% goods return by our single very important customer. I think what they're probably looking for in here, let's just see what it says again. Comment on potential quality cost changes in the light of proposed move. So we can't have this huge incurrence of costs and external failure costs. Our customer won't put up with this 5%. And what we have to do, therefore, is to move effort that ways. If we go to our supplier and explain to the supplier and maybe pay a little bit more and say your goods, your raw materials have to be perfect, that's prevention cost. If we check our production as we go through production, that's an appraisal cost. Then we can rework goods before they got too far. We can identify, why is that this button being, what place is this button being sewed on the wrong part of the dress and so on. We can correct that. That's going to be relatively cheap to kind of stop that happening. If you move more effort and therefore more cost to these earlier stages, you will be fantastically paid back by the great reduction in internal failure costs and external failure costs. So the change of emphasis needed here is on prevention and appraisal, and the change of emphasis needed also is with the company's staff, so they no longer feel that high volume doesn't care about the quality, that high volume is not to be pursued for its own sake anymore. What is really important in this environment is that we get high quality. High quality, more important than high volume, although we'll certainly work towards that as well.